Well, hey guys, happy Wednesday night. It is Wes Seiler here from the Burkean Conservative, and I'm so happy to be joining you. It's been a couple weeks since we've been able to do a live video, and I'm thrilled to be able to do this one. Really, this is our first one since Biden took over as president. So, we've got so much material coming up to talk about that, the big change that that's brought, our thoughts on it. I can't wait to bring in many of our other guys that are affiliated with the project to discuss the future of a Biden presidency. What does that look like for the conservative movement? What does that look like for America? Obviously, with the executive orders that he's been doing, there's been a lot of action already. So there's a whole lot to sort through over the next few days as we start to begin to anticipate what does this mean in terms of him doing all this action, and then what is he going to do next? Is he going to continue with this level of activism and kind of drastically changing things that the Trump administration put into place? So we're going to talk about that in the future tonight. What I want to talk about is rebuilding conservatism. I've seen so many articles and posts and blogs and videos and all kinds of stuff talking about the fractured conservative movement, a civil war within conservatism. What's the future of the GOP, of the Republican Party? And I kind of want to address that, to put some thoughts down on that. And I'm curious if you've seen those things, if you've seen any of those articles, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you're watching this live, go ahead and let me know. Go ahead and comment below. Let me know that you're watching live, and we can talk about it. We can kind of have a dialogue. It always makes these things more fun. And then if you're watching this later on in the week, hit me up with a message and let me know what you think the future of conservatism is, because that's what we're going to get into tonight. Coming up this Sunday, though, we're going to have both of our shows. We're going to have Conservatism on tap, and then Refounding Fathers here we're going to have as well on Sunday night. That's when we're going to get into the executive orders that Biden has done, the future of his presidency, his cabinet positions, all the things that he's doing to change America. We're going to get into that. We're also going to get into the 1619 Project as well as the 1776 Project. And I know a lot of our followers are familiar with this, but if you haven't heard about these things yet, it's going to be really fascinating because we're going to get into two different ways to look at America, and they really represent where a lot of modern liberals are, as well as modern conservatives are, in terms of how they see this country. And it's just so different in terms of the issues that they emphasize and how they see things. And with the 1776 Project, this was stood up by Trump before he left office, and they came up with reports just as his term was ending. And Biden shut that down. And so we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to talk about the research that went into the 1776 Project, and then we're going to look at what's going on with the 1619 Project. And I can't wait to get the perspectives of liberals and libertarians and other conservatives on this and where they stand. So that's going to be this Sunday night. But for tonight, this is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about rebuilding conservatism. If you look at where the conservative movement is at today, there's obviously a lot of anger. There's frustration. There's a lot that was lost. I mean, we lost the presidency in Donald Trump. We have lost the Senate majority. We have lost, obviously we didn't retake the House. We did get a few seats picked up, but really you have all of Congress. There's still a lot of conservatives in the Supreme Court and the court system, but with what Biden can do over the next 4 years, it's going to be tough to wrestle with. And then obviously there's going to be elections that are upcoming, and who do we put in those positions to be able to run? And then what do we do 4 years from now? How do we retake that? Does that mean going back to Trump? Assuming that he survives the impeachment, which it looks like he's going to do, is that where we go? And then beyond that, beyond which particular person we put in office or run for election, what do we do as everyday Americans, conservatives? How do we kind of rebuild this movement, get it organized, and to be able to make change in our own lives? That's what I want to talk about tonight. Is I've got some different steps that I think that would be helpful that we're going to try to practice on this show. And then I encourage you to think about, and then let me know. Let me know your reactions. Feel free to comment again or send me a message, and we can talk about them. So the first step that I would recommend for conservatives anywhere is to regain trust in the electoral process. I mean, that's what we've seen over the past few weeks and months, is conservatives almost everywhere have lost any trust in the electoral process. I mean, you look at surveys today. I saw one earlier this evening that said that 75% or more of Republicans distrust the results of the 2020 election. The evidence of fraud that people have seen has made them outraged. The debate, the dismissal that liberals have, within just a few days after the election occurred, there was kind of this assumption that fraud couldn't have happened, and that angered a lot of conservatives who believed that it was prevalent. And then you look at some of the places that were contested, like Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and there's a history there of fraud. And a lot of conservatives are angry because they believe that their voice was not heard. It was dismissed for lack of standing by the Supreme Court. Many of the other courts threw it out. So there's a lot of frustration there. But where do we go as the conservative movement if we don't have elections, if we don't have a popular vote to be able to participate in? Then what do we do? The whole system kind of falls apart if we have no trust whatsoever in the electoral system. And that's where I believe you see the Capitol riots, is the people there, some of them were extremists, some of them were just looking for a fight. I totally believe that. But if you lose trust in the electoral system, and not just some sense of anger or the presence of fraud, but if you completely lose trust in it, then what recourse do you have to be able to make change or prevent change in our case? And that's where people turn towards violence. I don't think we can do that, even if there's issues of fraud in an election. And I said this on our show many times, that no election is without some level of fraud. It's just imperfect people counting votes. I'm sure there's some people in there that are not doing a good job. And there's certainly people out there who want to be able to rig an election and change it. So you're always going to have some level of fraud. But how do we address that as a country? Because this isn't our first time dealing with it. We go to the court system, and that's where you look at the judges that Trump appointed. And if you're unhappy with those judges, if you're unhappy with how they handled this, then that's where you want to make a change. That's where you go to the court system to be able to arbitrate any type of fraud or electoral problems. And the fact that many conservatives just kind of blew right by the court, even though it was many Trump appointees, many of the justices that he put in place, that's a problem for conservatives that we have to resolve. Is we have to say, look, we may not like the results of this election. We may believe that aspects of it were unfair, but we can't get to a point where we distrust elections in general, because then it opens up a doorway for liberals to be able to take over and own the country for years and years to come. Is we have to get to a point where we retrust elections, even if we have some sense of skepticism still within them, and that's totally justified. But we can't get to a point where we just give up on the whole process. I think that's the first step towards rebuilding conservatism. 2, we have to become advocates of conservatism as a belief system, as a perspective, not just its defenders. And what I mean here is that many times I see conservatives who go on and they fight wars on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, right, in person, or they're arguing with somebody and they're fighting on behalf of conservatism. But rarely do I see people actually explaining what attracts them to conservative beliefs, why they're good and better, and being able to present all of the arguments. So often we phrase conservatism as if it's patriotism, as if only conservatives are patriots of this country. And we tend to castigate every liberal, every moderate, anyone who believes differently as a socialist, as someone who's trying to destroy the country. And there are times and places to be able to do that, because there are people that I believe that are trying to destroy this country, and there are people that are too far to the extreme that need to be countered. But there's also this huge area in the middle where people are just watching and they don't know. They don't know where they stand on particular issues. Maybe they don't even have any interest in politics. Are we doing enough to be able to advocate our principles to those people, to pull people into the conservative movement? Looks like we got our first comment here, so I'm going to take a look at these two and bring them in. But what I mean by this is being able to explain why you believe what you believe. Can you explain to people exactly why conservatism is the right belief system, what attracts you to it, and why more people should be conservatives rather than simply saying, well, I'm conservative because I'm an American? That's not good enough to be able to explain to younger generations why. We have to be able to do things like explaining Where did the Constitution come from? Why are its beliefs so good? Why is the Constitution one of the best document for any government in the history of man? And why should we continue to follow it hundreds of years later? Being able to explain those things, to talk about them, and to show how intertwined conservatism is to American history and why it's worth believing in today is important. And I don't feel like we do that enough. Instead, what we do is we try to trigger people, or we just attack particular personalities. We talk about AOC and we can't stand her. We talk about Bernie Sanders and we hate this guy. Okay, that's part of it, but being able to take it back to the actual underlying beliefs is something that more people need to do, because all of a sudden then you have people who say, oh, I want to be in the conservative movement. And we did this to an extent in the last election. If you look at Florida, where I'm from, there was Trump won Florida by a wider margin in 2020 than he did against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Why? And it's because the Republican Party here and the Trump campaign here did an amazing job of articulating conservatism to people in middle and southern Florida, being able to talk about socialism and the danger it posed and why things were working better under a Republican administration. And people coming out of Cuba and other countries in South America saw that message. It resonated with them, and they said, that's exactly why I want to be here in America. We can do that across this country if we make a dedicated effort. But if we're constantly being dragged down into petty fights, if we're constantly focused on individual personalities and never on the principles, then we'll never be able to rebuild conservatism. So we have to do it. I've got a comment here from Alex saying, be for things, not just against. Exactly right. And that's what I'm going to talk about in my next one. We must explain why statism fails. And I'm going to explain what that means. We must explain why statism fails. When I say statism, I mean it's the belief that government can solve your problems. It's not just socialism. Socialism means that a person wants the government to take over all the industries of production, okay? Communism is this belief that by doing so, we can eradicate evil in the world, right? But there are other beliefs like fascism, in which the government also tries to direct industry towards a particular goal, right? There's all kinds. There's welfare, right? There's welfare statism. There's all kinds of different mixes. But underlying every single belief, socialist or not, that tends towards that autocracy is what could be called statism, which is this belief that the government can fix it. The government can fix the problems in the world today, right? And there's a kernel of truth in this, because if the government is run by good people and its means are focused, it can do certain things. They can build a road. You can put a cop on the street. You can provide support to education. There are things that government can do. But in statism, there's belief that government can fix the trouble and the problems within human nature, and it cannot. It cannot. The failings of human nature are part of who we are on a day-to-day basis, and no government can fix that. If you have problems in your life, if they're of any significance, then the most that government can do is probably take the edge off and help a little bit. If you're struggling to find a job, right, then government may be able to give you unemployment insurance and things like that. You may be able to find some type of job within the government itself. But in terms of developing the skills and the motivation and the education and the simple will to succeed, government can't give you that. You have to cultivate that in yourself. And so many times we see a belief that, you know what, if we just did this program, if we just had government do X, Y, and Z, then all of your problems would go away. If government just paid for all of my student loans, then everything would be fine. And it wouldn't be fine, because then immediately you're in debt for your mortgage, you're in debt for your car, you're in debt for your family. There's so many other things. And so government could take the edge off. It could take care of one problem, but it can create many more, because then, of course, it's paying for it with other people's money. Now they have problems, right? So statism has to be confronted and explained. Not just liberals, not just socialism, but statism itself. And then we have to explain what works. And this goes to Alex's point. It's not just business. And this kind of frustrates me, because I see it on conservative channels all the time, is that there is kind of this assumption that you have two options. You have socialism and you have business, and they're totally apart. You're either capitalist or you're socialist, and that's it. And that is just this gross oversimplification, because what happens in practice is that in our country, if you're a business person and you make a lot of money, there's nothing stopping you from investing a lot of that money into the government, paying for politicians to be able to vote the way that you want them. If you make huge contributions to a politician, then that politician owes you his or her job. And so how do you think they're going to vote? And this happens all the time. It's something that Trump talked about when he ran for office. And so there is absolutely nothing preventing a person from being able to invest their money into the government to be able to have influence and power over that. And so a business person can become intertwined with the government itself. And so this notion of government's over here and business is over here, and if we get rid of government, then everything will be fine because we'll have business. It's not the case, because a huge portion of business is what is keeping the government as big as it is today. So what works? Again, it goes back to human nature. It goes back to the notion that restrictions that honor human nature as it is, that see it dispassionately as it is the way forward. And that's what we have. That brings us back to the Constitution, the system that the founders put in place today. Not perfect, but it had a clear understanding of human nature, and it was skeptical of it, while also giving people the chance to have freedoms to be able to live their lives. And so that's what we have: competing powers, a government that is turned against itself, that has to be able to struggle against itself the way Madison set it up, is important because it keeps one faction from growing too large. And what I've seen in the conservative movement over the past several years is it seems like we've kind of thrown away some of those restrictions or regard for them, and we simply want power. We simply want as big as government can get. As long as it's doing what we want, it's fine. We need to go back to what Madison said. We need to go back to a government that is, to some degree, intertwined and in others dysfunctional on purpose, so that we have to solve some of these problems in our own lives. We have to join together as a community. And this goes to what works. What works is not just government. It's not just business. It's people starting to take care of people, people growing together in communities, in their churches, in their community centers, their schools, their places of work, their places of recreation, getting together to be able to help each other whenever someone has a need. Whenever someone is in an emergency, does the community get together and mobilize and take care of them? That's the sign of a healthy community, not one that has either a big corporate business next door or one that has a big government handout coming through. We have to get back to that sense of community in our country, and that means taking the focus off of politics to a degree and back onto ourselves. So I think those are steps as we look at rebuilding conservatism. If you want to get my perspective, so many times people who follow this page say, Wes, what do you believe? I see you interviewing George Will. I see you interviewing Rick Green. I see you having a libertarian on your show. I see you having a liberal on your show. Are you a Burkean? What does that mean? What type of conservatism do you follow? And that's exactly what I'm giving you here. This is the conservatism that I follow. One in which we realize that processes aren't perfect and we work with them anyway. We're advocates of conservative principles, and I hopefully can empower you to be the same. Not just fighters, not just defenders, but most importantly of all, that we are people who can explain why we believe what we do. We can articulate that at numerous different levels and be able to share that. And kind of as I kind of go out here, one of the last quotes I want to leave you with tonight is, you've probably seen this. This is from Reagan years ago, and it's quoted all the time. Reagan said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. And I think what Reagan's getting at here is this notion of don't get comfortable. Don't get comfortable, because even if we have this amazing country, we have all this wealth, we have all these freedoms, we could lose it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The next generation or the one after that could lose it. And so don't get too comfortable with freedom, because you could lose it. I would add to that, though, that freedom being the way that Reagan describes, it's also never more than one generation away from revival. And that brings us back to the founders. is that the founders were in the situation where they were looking at an empire that was barreling down on them, almost certain death, and they had a group of people in these different colonies who didn't agree on much, and they were trying to join them together to be able to make this statement, the argument, and then ultimately the war to be able to have a country. And they did that in their generation because they had truth and because they were willing to fight for that truth. And that's what you see in those documents that are so important. And so when I see these people who are terrified of a Biden administration, or Kamala Harris, or Bernie Sanders, or Pete Buttigieg, or any of these guys getting in there and making changes, absolutely, there's concern there. And I don't want to dismiss that. But I also don't want us to get into a sense of fatalism, meaning that you think it's inevitable that America is going to collapse, or that it can't be saved, or that there's nothing we can do, right? There's always something we can do, and it goes back to what I just talked about. So freedom can be lost, but because it's fundamental to human nature, because it's the truth of what allows human beings to survive, to thrive, to grow, it's always capable of being revitalized, of being rescued, of being recovered. And that's the type of optimistic focus that I think we need to have as conservatives going forward. So that's what our channel's about. That's what I believe. Don't forget that we have these shows coming up on Sunday, and I'll bring them back up here. We're going to have Refounding Fathers on Sunday, 8:30 Central. We'll be going into these two different projects, the Contrasting Worldviews, and then Conservatism on Tap will happen right after that. And we're going to have an awesome show. Don't forget our website, theburkeanconservative.com, Facebook page, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're on all of them. Send us a message. Let me know what you thought of tonight and what topics you'd like us to cover next time. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of the week, and I will see you this Sunday.